I'm interviewing Martha Parks, and she will be describing her role in the development of the Women's Center in Marquette, Michigan. Martha, can you give us a little background on how you came to be where you are?
Yeah, I have a master's degree in counseling, and I'm currently a shop owner in downtown Marquette. I've actually been involved with the Women's Center from the beginning, but I didn't know it at the beginning. I was in college and taking some summer classes, and the Rasmussens were the professors there of that class, and one day we were at their house during the summertime. I can't recall why, but they had a coffee table in their living room with all these envelopes and invitations, and so they recruited some of us to stuff the envelopes and lick the stamps, lick the envelopes, and that was all I knew at the time. I graduated from Northern. I got married. I had 3 little kids, and in like 1983 or so, I came back to Marquette. Was leaving that marriage and trying to get resettled with my children. So I was referred to the Women's Center, and I met with Barb, who was a counselor there at that time. She referred me to the Displaced Homemaker program, which was at the intermediate school district at that time. And all of those resources started to help me kind of pull things together and get back in school and, get established as a place to bring my children.
Was the Displaced Homemakers program basically counseling and helping be aware of resources? What exactly happened there?
It was back in the glory days when we had a Department of Women in Work at the state level, and they developed this program for women who had the traditional kind of marriage. They got married right out of high school or right out of college, and devoted their career to raising their families, and then were displaced either through death or divorce, and did not have the job skills that they needed to then be self-sufficient and get a job. There were some qualifiers to be involved in that I don't quite recall, but they did do a lot of resume building and skill building and referral to job training programs and things like that. Mostly, though, it was often very much a support group, because most of these women didn't see it coming, and they needed a lot of support to kind of just get through and get on with things.
And didn't know they had skills, didn't?
Right. A lot of the people later on, when I was running that program, when it ended up back at the Women's Center, a lot of them really blossomed after that, and we had many success stories. They just started feeling better about themselves, and that's the first step, I think, in getting a job, whatever the job might be.
And did quite a large number of women go through that? I don't know, a few or dozens or?
I'm not sure. I would know over time, but it was a full-time position to have somebody assigned to that program. And, we were allowed to help people that didn't actually qualify, too, so a lot of times maybe a younger person in kind of the same situation would come in, and we would help and refer and assist them with getting their needs met.
Well, I interrupted your train of thought. It was at the ISD, then the Women's Center took it on? Or?
Eventually it came to the Women's Center. When I wanted to say, though, when I met Barb, it was just kind of a deja vu thing. She knew I was trying to come up here. My kids were staying with my parents in Manistee, and I was trying to come up here and find an apartment and all that kind of stuff. And she knew I was going to come up one time, but she was going to be out of town, and she offered me to stay at her house. And so I got the directions to her house, and when I went there, I went, oh my goodness, that's the Rasmussens' old house. So where I was stuffing envelopes is the first place I stopped when I came back to Marquette.
And did
So-
you ever find out the purpose of those envelopes?
I did eventually, but it took a long time. Those envelopes were being stuffed for and mailed for that call to action conference that they had that eventually started the Women's Center. So I went back to school and I got my master's degree, worked at raising the 3 kids, had to be on welfare, had to meet the requirements of that, and one of those things was a job club. And back in the mid-'80s, they had job clubs everywhere. And it was basically, the premise was that if you're not working, then your job is to get a job. And so you had to spend so many hours a week in a job search. You had to document your job search. You had to spend time in class, building your resume, practicing interviews, and all of those kinds of things, learning interest tests and things like that. So I was assigned to the job club at the Women's Center during that time.
And you say assigned, who, what agency?
It was Department of Social Services. Now it's not that, but
So, yeah, it's gone through many transformations.
yeah.
So it was a state program.
Yeah.
Do you view that, looking back, as a positive, that approach to getting women back in the workforce? Was that helpful?
Well, it was women and men, and of course, when you're forced to go, it doesn't feel very positive. There was a lot of things. I learned a lot of things. It was always too bad that they can't individualize things. I had just come from 5 years working in the employment industry with what was then the CETA program and helping people get back to work and building resumes, and I kind of knew all this stuff. So, but you kind of have to do what you're told when you're in that kind of a situation.
Sure.
So I completed that assignment there, and like I said, finished my degree, and at some point I ran into Barb Ballou again at a grocery store, and she told me that there were some openings at the Women's Center. I think I was almost done with my degree, and I applied then to run the job clubs, with kind of co-lead the job clubs. And
I like that, because you then could critique your own running of it based on your experience going through it.
I did, yeah, I did. And I think I've not confessed this before, but I didn't really know what I would be like in front of a whole classroom full of people. I'd never done anything like that, and I didn't know how that would go, but I needed a job, and so I talked myself into getting that job. And it went well. I think when I was working with Carol Fisher, and I think we both kind of had some of the same mindset, and you can do all those things, you can have a pretty resume, you can have, you can practice interviewing night and day, but unless you really feel good about yourself, it doesn't come across any better. And so what we did was, I remember one time helping a woman get her teeth fixed. She couldn't smile, and so we found somebody who would get her teeth fixed. And once she had her teeth fixed, she was smiling, and she was feeling so good about herself. So in a lot of cases, in especially, even the men who came to class, they were angry, and it was back in the time when a lot of the mines were shutting down, and that was not just a job, that was who they were. That was who they were. Their families did that, and it was who they were. So they had to get over that kind trauma, I guess, in order to be able to really see they were way clear to be able to do something else.
So your counseling skills really fed into helping in that realm.
Yeah. There was nothing like watching, kind of watching the peer group work with each other and support each other and tell each other the truth, even if they didn't like it. And it was a real interesting time. And that time we were still at the basement of the church. And sometime during that time, the Displaced Homemaker program on the state level came up as an open bid process. So the Women's Center wrote the grant and got the program. And so it moved from the intermediate school district to the Women's Center. And while that was going on, we were looking for another place. Sally Mae was the director. She and I went a few places looking for land and looking for houses and looking for, she just kind of let me tag along. And eventually they found the Woodruff building, and I wasn't involved in the creative way they managed to acquire that building, but it was amazing. And so we all, painted and...
That's come through in so many of the interviews, the working together, the community support, the donation of unions and volunteers like yourself. They made it happen. Right. It must have been fun to watch that evolution.
It was fun. And we were, doing the programming at the same time. And I also got to, we proposed an idea to the Department of Social Services that instead of Job Club, I think we called it Project Self-Sufficiency or something, where we would exclusively deal with women who were on welfare who had very young children, not in school yet. And the goal then was not to get a job, but to get a plan and know where they would be going once their kids went to school.
Was there quite a number of people that fit that category?
There were. The classes were full all the time, and we tried to keep the classes, under 20 because of the dynamics of it and what we wanted to accomplish there. And what's interesting is that we didn't talk about resumes or interviews or job skills or anything. We talked about positive thinking and finding yourself and quit focusing on all that bad stuff that happened. I literally had a woman who, she was so angry. Her husband, she had 2 or 3 little kids, and her husband literally went out, I'm going out for a pack of cigarettes, and never came back. Never came back. And, she was still angry about that. And so instead of, and it was a lot of that kind of theory of don't look at where you've been, look at where you want to go, don't look at that rock in the road, look away around the rock in the road and find where you need to be. And it was interesting because they were always impressed if at the end of I think a 4-week long job club, if a third of the people got a job, that was successful. The first time we ran the Project Self-Sufficiency, or I don't know what we called it, it was a 3-week program, and 50% of the people got a job before the end of the program, which only proves to me that it's how you feel about yourself and how you project yourself that is what is really telling. And that same woman whose husband left and bought a pack of cigarettes got the job that she's still at today. And she was very successful. Met a new husband through that job, and it all turned out very well for her.
Life goes on.
Life goes on, yeah.
All right, so we've got you doing those programs. Did you stay with the Women's Center then, or move to other positions?
I stayed until 1988. We did other things too. I mean, we still did the assertiveness training classes, and we did some special workshops around different, like codependency and different issues like that.
Did those serve mostly local Marquette women? I know there was a point of expansion to other areas in the county.
At that time, it was still
Marquette.
mostly Marquette, yeah. In fact, we also started the first lesbian support group during that time.
Way ahead of some
Yeah.
areas.
Yeah. So, in 1988, a job I couldn't refuse came open at the Air Force Base as the director of the Family Support Center. So I got that job and accepted that job and worked there for 5 years or so till the base closed. But during that time, Sue Kensington became the executive director. I still felt I still felt attached to the Women's Center, and I got to know her, and I kind of helped her bridge into the Air Force Base, because that was always a connection that seemed difficult. So me being the Family Support Center director and kind of helping people and referring people to the Women's Center too.
It was a good collaboration there.
Yeah, it was a good collaboration,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. So then the base closed, and then I got a job. I was the director of Lutheran Social Services, and that part of that job involved the Voices for Youth program, a homeless program. So I got back into the homeless and the domestic violence shelter, and was part of that working group in the community. And I was back on the board, and
So it was hard, or not, didn't make sense to disconnect. Everything joined.
Yeah, I just kept coming back home, kind of, I guess.
And I found that to be, through these interviews and others, life in Marquette, people do tend to develop loyalties. I mean, obviously you were attached to the Women's Center,
Yeah.
its programs.
Yeah. And then my job with Lutheran Social Services ended, and I decided to kind of lay low for a bit, and I got into doing some consulting work, partly with the Great Lakes Center for Youth Development, and now Gail Nelson was the director, and through that connection, I hooked up and became a technical assistant provider for Michigan Department of Housing, Michigan Housing Development Authority, MISHDA. And my first client was the Women's Center. So I was a consultant paid by MISHDA to help the Women's Center write policies and procedures and assist the board with strategic planning and things like that. So I did other things other places too, but that was, my primary involvement during that time.
And again, those long-term commitments pay off because you knew how the Women's Center had evolved and where they need to push their strengths and deal with their weaknesses, I would guess.
Yeah, it's like it's like finding a therapist, and you don't have to start from when you were born. They know the whole thing already, and so they can fill it and move on. Yeah.
And then what came next?
Then what came next? I think I was away for a while, not connected as a board member or anything. And a few years ago, it sounded like there were some challenges, and I was concerned, and so were some other people, and we kind of got together and tried to help resolve some of those concerns and challenges, and then here I am back on the board again.
Right. Now they talked about the founding mothers, whom you've referred to, Sally Mae and some of those, but it sounds like you're a founding daughter, that you came in at a certain point and have stayed loyal.
I like that.
What is your vision now for the Women's Center? Where do you think they are, and what are they hoping? Because several people have mentioned the period of declining funding for a lot of practical reasons, but so some of the programs have either gotten smaller or disappeared. Is there a projected plan for those, or are we still working out the...
Well, it's interesting because as a board of very, very dedicated people, we have this conversation often about the shelter. The shelter is a very important program, but it isn't the only thing the Women's Center is about. And we know in this day and age that the work is not done. You can see it. You watch the news, you can see it every day. And so I'm always advocating to be, for us to be flexible and open to developing new things and adding new programs as we can, and to be to continue to be that beacon that's probably the only place in Marquette that really advocates for women and children, really. So I think there's still plenty of work to do, and I think the Women's Center is probably the only real agency to do that. We have these conversations sometimes, and any other agency could run a shelter. People
So
know how to run a shelter.
perhaps
but
out there,
people don't
shift.
know how to run a shelter that helps women get back on their feet. It's just not the same.
So funding is probably the main issue, despite all this community support, trying to get enough funding to hire more staff and develop those things.
Right. Well, the years of finding grants for things, is gone. Pretty much gone.
So it's taking creativity, and as outside the Women's Center, I see the board and a lot of people, we've got a creative crew at work there. So.
Oh, it's amazing, yeah. It's an amazing group of women to be working with, and back working with Sally, and she's got some great ideas about making the center self-sufficient. People have said, there's a lot of good agencies in town. There's a lot of agencies, nonprofit agencies that do wonderful work, but they're hard pressed to think about what our community, but some of them, if they folded, it would be sad, but the community would probably be able to pick it up. If the Women's Center folded, that would be tragic. They cannot imagine what our community would be like if there wasn't a Women's Center. So we've come that far, at least, that people are seeing the value of us.
And the passion behind. I think that's what drew people like yourself, Sally, Pat, all of whom we've interviewed back into the...
I didn't become a feminist the way that Sally and Holly and Pat did.
Tell a little about that. Yeah, tell a little about that. That it's generational, age-related to a degree, and your own personal circumstances. So explain how you did get drawn into thinking.
I do say that, I had Dr. McClellan as a professor when I was going to Northern, and I'm sure he's probably the first male feminist that I knew, and he just, I think it was always in me. I mean, I was always kind of questioning the very traditional family that I had growing up, and why does it fall to me to make dinner when there's 4 other capable hands in this room who could make dinner when Mom's sick? You know, that kind of thing was kind of always, you know, floating out there, and anyway, Dr. McClellan kind of put it in some context for me occasionally, and I think that then planted some seeds that and I know that he was always kind of frustrated because he couldn't see people my age becoming feminists, but he did plant a seed, and I thought at the time, maybe we don't until we're actually out in the real world, where you're experiencing discrimination on the job, or sexual harassment, or, you know, people wanting to stick you in very traditional roles and responsibilities, not getting paid as much as the guys, you know.
Was this in a history class, or how did the topic come up? Yeah, because
was
he was a history professor.
Well, I think it was maybe the first women's study class. Or minority history. That's what it was, minority history. And I think that's probably why. That's partly part of it, because he would probably say, well, this is minority history, but this is not a minority, you know. He's like, but this is the only place they let us talk about women's issues, and so that's what we're doing, you know. So that, yeah. And then, of course, some of the things I started reading at that time also made a difference.
And so when you became a single parent and raising your children, did it really kick in then, or again just evolve, or?
I think it just evolved. When you're raising, you know, my kids were like 3 and twins of 1 when all this started, you know. I don't know that I thought about much of anything outside of getting through every day. I think it just evolved, and getting in with the Women's Center was part of that too.
As you're speaking, it makes me a little curious. If you hadn't been directed to, or quote, forced to go to some of these programs, do you think your life would have been different, or do you think you had that core of, I've got to support myself, or was it a combo of?
I think I had that core, because during that, yeah, the Women's Center just made me feel like I was supported in that.
And it was the right thing to do.
Yeah, and it was the right thing to do, because, you know, during that time, yeah, you get all kinds of questions, and, you know, how can you manage going to work with your 3 little children? What do you do with your 3 little children? You know, and I used to just be a real smarty pants and say, oh, just tie them to their beds and give them bread and water. They're fine. You know, you do what you gotta do. Why do you know, like, and those questions kind of make you feel guilty in some ways, and
but you're dealing with the hand you were dealt with.
Yeah, yeah. And those are questions coming from the people who love you. and you know, there's an underlying tone of, you know, like, how dare you, kind of, almost, with it. And I didn't like that. And yeah, the Women's Center heightened that for me. And when I was involved in directing programming, you know, we always went out into the community and had conversations with people. And I don't know if I should say this, but I went to a meeting of some clergy back then, and explained about domestic violence and sexual violence, and, you know, what the programs were, and why it was important, and they invited me, so it's like I told them, and there was I had to be someplace for lunch. I think it was something at my kid's school, but they invited me to stay for lunch, and I said no, I really have to go. And this guy came following me out to my car and said, I think this is a really, really important issue, and I think women need to know that children of divorced parents are more likely to become juvenile delinquents and involved in crime and not finish high school. And if they knew that, then they would stay with their spouse because, they would want to do the right thing for their children. And I just looked at him and I said, excuse me, I need to go. I'm going to go have lunch with my future juvenile delinquent dropout criminal children.
So you do have that core.
I do have that core, yeah.
And those ideas were prevalent. There still are some,
still
but that's the role that you're playing.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything we haven't touched on that you'd like to share?
Well, there's so much. It's just it's just an awesome organization. I'm really proud to be part of it.
Well, we're pleased to have you sharing your thoughts, and I thank you very much for doing so. Martha Parks, Marquette resident who has evolved with the Women's Center.
Mm-hmm.
One more thing, how did you end up in this lovely shop? And
Crossroads again. Well, it's time to do something different. My first grandchild was born a year ago. Just found out I'm going to be a grandma again. And I had a breast cancer scare. And I just decided, I guess it's time for me to do something a little quieter, a little more fun. So.
And let your creative
Yeah.
strength show. It's lovely. Well, thank you again, Martha.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.